Now let's call the meeting to order and get started with the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. And do we have any staff announcements?
I just have one announcement. On December 10th at the last Board of Supervisors meeting, the board went with the Planning Commission's recommendation to approve the zoning amendment and variance for the St. Charles Hospitality LLC project, which will inevitably result in the construction and operation of a 79-room hotel with associated restaurant in San Andreas. So that's my report for today.
Great. And no agenda changes, I assume. We don't have much left to change.
No changes.
Okay. Then this is an opportunity for general public comments on items not on the agenda today. Is there anybody online or in the audience who would like to speak to the Planning Commission about anything within our subject purview, but not on the agenda today?
No online public comment.
None? So the consent agenda consists only of Planning Commission minutes of November 14th. Is there anybody in the member of the public or the commission who want to remove that item for further discussion?
No.
Then is there anybody who would like to make a motion on that item?
I move we adopt those minutes.
I will second that.
All in favor? Aye. Any opposed? None. Passes 4-1-0. And our regular agenda item, 2024-022 zoning amendment cultural resources management ordinance, continued from 11/14/24. We'll pick up again where we left off. Peter, is there anything you want to do to introduce your modifications?
Just a little. Okay. No, just a little brief background. We first heard this in October. There was some input from the commission. I made the changes that were suggested by the majority of the commission. That revised version of the ordinance was provided to you in the packet for the 14th of November. That's the document they'll be working off of today. Just as you recall, this is an implementation measure of the general plan, and those were actually mitigation measures from the EIR. So it's something that we have indicated that we wanted to do and needed to do and move forward. This is our last opportunity to discuss this if we want to get it before the board before the urgency ordinance expires. If you get it passed on today, the board will hear it on January 14th, their first meeting of the year, which gives us just 30 days for it to become effective until the urgency ordinance expires on February 13th. So I implore you to let's work through it today and get her done.
Yeah, absolutely.
So I know that Supervisor Laddish had some additional suggestions. Annette, do you have? Pass those out to the commission and the members of the public that want to see those as well. And I think the best thing to do is maybe just work through those and any other suggestions or concerns or questions that the commission has. Maybe I could suggest that if there are general questions that we could sort of address those first, and then we want to get into the sort of the line by line recommended or suggested edits. That probably would be the most effective course of action.
This is the same one from previously, Annette?
Yes.
There's one new suggestion.
Okay.
So I guess, are there any sort of general questions or issues, concerns that the commission
I have
has?
one that I didn't deal with, and I don't see it in here. I don't see a clear setting forth of if a property owner wants to have his property designated on the local register of historic buildings and structures. I don't see the specific entry provision. Where does this say that such an application can be made, and how it would trigger the determination by the planning director as to whether the property fits?
So it's
Have the same
not
comment.
specifically in the ordinance, but it would be in the Mills Act resolution that would be going forward the board that authorizes a property owner to apply for the property tax
But
reduction.
in order to apply for that property tax, they have to have gone through the process of having the property assessed, evaluated.
Right. But this only addresses the proposed alteration, demolition, or relocation of a structure. It would not prevent anyone from voluntarily entering into a Mills Act contract. But that, I don't believe that it is necessary to put that in there, because once we have the resolution that says the county is going to participate in this program, anyone in the resolution, which is not before you because it's not a part of the ordinance itself, will, the draft resolution that we worked on for the board has that provision in it that anyone can voluntarily apply. Someone doesn't, even if someone who is affected by this ordinance, and it's been determined that it is one, does not have to participate in the Mills Act. They can if they want to. So we're sort of talking they're interrelated, but they're apples and oranges. This is sort of a regulatory program to prevent the loss of resources, where the use of the Historic Building Code and participation in the Mills Act is voluntary. We won't compel someone to do that, but it certainly provides a benefit for someone who says, well, I've got to maintain this historic resource now. At least I had to get a tax benefit from it, and I can use the Historic Building Code to reduce some of the
The
costs.
language in here says the building official shall use the historic building code if the building has been determined to be eligible. So, or listed on, and then listed on ours.
Yeah.
But I think we do need to say in here that if someone wants to voluntarily list their property, and I could see that someone might want to do it to prevent a future person from doing something, they want to protect their property in perpetuity.
Well, it wouldn't protect it in perpetuity. It's a 10-year rolling contract, much like the Williamson
No,
Act.
I'm not talking about a contract, just list their property.
To have
While
it-
that
have it
property
be
is
there.
still
I
eligible
see what you
before
mean.
something else happens to it, they want to list it and make sure that it's acknowledged.
And then
And they don't necessarily have an immediate project in mind.
And I think you need to have somewhere, if they do apply for that the provisions within this ordinance that say the planning director shall be responsible for determining whether the building meets the criteria, that needs to be in there somewhere. The application itself can't turn the building into a historic building.
Right, right. I demand you list my building on there.
I think maybe, part of, well, I agree with the chair. I think there needs to be something in here that at least reflects that such an application can be made, and if made, then the determination under subsection C will be made by the planning director.
If that is something the commission desires, then we can add that to the
So
ordinance.
I think we'll probably come back to that
Yeah.
at the end. Does anybody else have any general questions or heads ups, Peter, so he can start thinking on them?
Well, I'll do a heads up for later on. I have, although I'm fully in favor of preserving historic buildings, and I have a particular fondness for barns, et cetera, that I don't think that the time is ripe for the maintenance and repair provisions, because I think that would need more fine tuning. And I will be proposing that we eliminate that from this round, and with the idea of dealing with it later. That's a heads up sort of a thing.
Okay. Commissioner Lozano, anything before we ask the public to speak? No. Okay. Let's open the public comment portion of the hearing, and guys are welcome to come up and add some comments related to the changes or proposed changes.
Well, I'll be brief. Julia Costello from McCollum Hill. And I just want to congratulate you on incorporating so many of the things we talked about last time and, putting forward the first big step for Calaveras County to have a preservation ordinance. And I think it is very important. And of course, there's things that we would like to see more of, and you'll probably see us back years to come, but I think this is very nice. And Tim brought up the archivist position. Are you going to talk about that later?
I will be talking about it later, but you can refer to it right now.
And I can see his rationale, which he hasn't presented to you, but that it would be kind of part of her job description if she were required to be on the panel. But the intent of us bringing it up last time, Judith Marvin and myself, is that it's the best resource the county has to date and assess the age of an old building. And it would just be nice to have it in the ordinance that the council, the review group, needs to consult the archivist. And maybe that could just be put in the process of things they do in consultation with the archivist or in determining the antiquity of the building or something to just direct them over there. It's a wonderful resource that is really underused in the county. And so I think Peter had a visit there, didn't you?
Yes.
Yeah.
So would it be good to put that sort of provision in the part of the ordinance that deals with the planning director's determination that the property meets the criteria?
Well, you all would know better where you were going to put it. I was thinking more under the responsibilities of the commission. I've lost my place here. The things that they're supposed to do, that they should consult with the county archivist.
Okay.
Or somewhere in the process.
Right.
That just to include this fabulous resource that we have.
And do you see, other than specifically determining the age of a structure, was there another role for the archivist? Is there some other?
Well, if there have been major changes and additions to the building, those will show up in the assessments. Mm-hmm. And so that's another avenue of, if the building doesn't look like it was built in 1860, when was that wing added? Would that still be within the period of significance? And the assessment records would show that. So actually any kind of historic information you wanted on that building, and she's fast and she knows her documents, and it's just reasonable to ask her as the first step, tell us what you can about this.
I just want to also note that we don't need to necessarily put good ideas in the ordinance. We don't know that the same human will be occupying that role in years to come. And so the concern, this is obviously there were offline conversations. There's a concern about the limitations of the job description. So what the county looks at is not the human occupying the role, but the job description as a county employee. And we as a planning commission are not in a position to determine whether or not her job description entails whatever is in this ordinance. That would be a separate Board of Supervisors decision. So
I think Julia's acknowledging that
Yes.
and just saying that it would be a heads up to that committee that the archivist is a resource. I just don't know if that belongs so much in the ordinance as in the policies of the
yeah.
planning department of these are the places that you would go to look
Right.
for these resources. And hey, great thing, right here in Calaveras County, we
I know,
have our
and you may-
own archivist.
And perhaps not saying archivist, but saying consult the county archives,
Yeah.
like you
I
would
think
consult
the
any.
policy would be a,
Yeah, I think it belongs in the policy for the people doing it. I don't know that we don't say, go look at this particular code section unless the code section is actually controlling what we're doing in the ordinance. And this is really just a checklist of things that people should be doing while they are making this determination or getting the information together so conditions can be crafted. It's really not a legal requirement that belongs in the ordinance, in my opinion.
No, and maybe you don't say shall or must,
Yeah.
you say such as.
Right.
Consulting the
that's what I was
archives.
just
I'm
gonna
just
say.
have had experience that, knowledgeable people disappear from boards and
Yes.
things move on and nobody ever goes to the archives again and they start arguing about that age of a house and someone has to come and say, have you gone to the archives? And they go, archives? Are there archives in the county? And
Yeah.
so just a suggestion that, such as, maybe that would make it softer. It's a chance to really get a common sense procedure into, law.
Thank you.
Okay. What is it?
Anybody else like to speak? Has everybody lost their voice?
Yeah.
Just having a problem with my hearing aids. I'm going to have to get some new ones, I guess. But I would just to say that I'm happy with what you've done so far. But this is mainly a reactive. It's not a proactive action. And so we'd like to see in the future a preservation ordinance. And we will never give up until we get a preservation ordinance. And we'll be working on that. But thank you for what you're doing so far.
Thank you. Is there anybody online, Annette?
There's no one.
Okay. Then we will close the public comment portion of the hearing and come back to the commissioners and perhaps start working our way through this section by section. But I wanted to start, I'm pretty certain that probably all of us have this one comment, which is that wherever it says demolition alterations, it should say reference demolition, relocation, or alteration, just
I
like,
was was going to say that wherever Mr. Laddish has suggested we add, just count that as a check.
One question along those lines. Is a relocation require a relocation permit or is it a building permit?
It's a building permit. It's a
Okay.
type of building permit.
Good, that makes it simpler too.
Yeah.
right.
Okay, great.
And I do have some language to offer sort of the voluntary listing. So when we get to that point, I can
Okay.
suggest that if you
So
like.
under purpose, does anybody have anything in addition to this kind of generic comment? Okay.
One thing that might help is Annette is primed to put the version of Peter's version, latest version, with my proposed amendment up on the screen, so that if there's anybody watching at home, they could keep track of it, and also there. So I don't mean to over promote my own suggestions, but this is just a way to make it available to the
It's
public.
unfortunate that when you did yours, you accepted all of his, and so they're no longer color coordinated, which are Peter's
That's true.
changes and which are, so I don't object to having it up on the screen so people can
So
see it, but it is.
this, what I have on the screen is what's in the packet, not what Commissioner Laddish has suggested.
Right.
So I can be making changes as
That-
we type, as we discuss it. Is there a way to
I think most of his
increase the size of
are
that?
most of the actual edits are very small.
Right.
There's more commentary on why. So I think that'll work. At least you can point that way.
Yeah, I think.
So are we ready to look at applicability?
So,
Oh.
just a clarification, so anything regarding relocation, Peter, my suggestions fit into
Yes,
what you had? in mind?
yes.
We won't-
So I'll just go through that when we're done today and add those
Just
changes.
do a find and replace and make it
Yeah,
consistent
yeah.
everywhere. Yeah,
Okay.
perfect. Okay, subsection B.
Yep.
Applicability.
And I don't want to dominate this, anybody has any suggestions, jump in, but I do have,
The
Suggestion.
only,
If I could add some general suggestion on this whole section. If you look at B1, I'll scroll down here. I'm not used to not having a mouse here, so bear with me a little bit while I mess with this. Oops, B1. So there's a couple of suggestions that Commissioner Lattice has made where we add the word exterior to like C3 and C5, but we're already only talking about the exterior alteration.
Yeah.
So I don't think that's necessary.
no, I wouldn't think it's necessary, but it's clarifying, is what I was thinking.
But there could be instances where the historic resource includes the interior. We talked about this at the meeting in October, where depending on the nature of the resource, the interior may actually contribute to the valuable aspect of that resource. It's probably rare, but there are certain circumstances where a state or federally listed building includes the interior. So I wouldn't want to preclude that. What we're looking at in this ordinance would be the demolition of or alteration of a structure, the exterior of that structure, and how that would affect the historic character of the structure from the county's perspective. But again, there are certain circumstances where the interior is, I'm sure there's a term of art used.
Sufficiently.
It includes that as a part of the overall resource that is intended to be protected.
So then in subsection B1C, you think that it's better without my insertion of exterior or had their exterior?
I do,
Okay.
yeah.
I
As far
prefer
as
the original language also.
B1C, Roman numeral 5, I would suggest that we make that a D. So it's not one of the listing. You had suggested that we change the word and. I think if we make that a separate subsection, it clarifies it. This sort of this stands alone. The other option would be just simply add it to the language of B1, the initial phrase there. But I think that having it
But it does need to be a separate.
does need to be separate. Yeah.
A separate and overpowering,
Distinct,
overwhelming,
yes.
whatever.
Right.
Yeah,
right.
I think adding it to B or keep a standalone section would be better. I wrote and in also, but I think your idea is better.
So
Okay.
let's have it as D.
So it becomes D under B1. Okay.
Is there anything else in the applicability section?
No, One thing though, by doing that, we have later sections that are referring back, I think, to subsection C, that, meets the description of subsection C. So-
We can do a global check of all of the references to make sure that that is included, one way or the other.
Yeah, so that we make sure that paramount consideration is preserved throughout the ordinance.
So let's look at determination and review procedures.
Oh.
Or-
What about, I have a suggestion, just to make it perfectly clear, that we have a subsection 2 that says, for purposes of this section, the terms altered and alteration refer only to exterior alterations. Now, that I thought was consistent with B1. But it just made, throughout the ordinance, why the draft, we're talking about alterations. And I thought it might be good to just make sure that it's clear that we're talking about exterior alterations.
I prefer to not have it. I feel like it's because for the exact description and explanation that Peter just gave, I think we already are targeting exteriors, and this makes this a more important statement than the way it's incorporated currently. But how do you guys feel?
So B1 clearly states, applies to exterior alterations to demolition or relocation. I think that covers it. That would be adequate, wouldn't it?
That's fine with me, thank you.
Okay, now we're going to talk about section C, determination and procedures. And
Okay, now here's something that I didn't see until last night. I'm sorry, Peter, do you want to speak to this section before I?
I'm not sure what section you're
We're
talking
talking
about.
about-
So there was,
C, determination
Yeah.
review.
so under C2, the fixing section to subsection is correct. The question that you raise is, the review under subsection I is broader. That's by design. So it's intended to be broader.
right,
Oh, yeah, I think it's clear that we're, in C1, we're only talking about the planning director's determination as to whether it meets the criteria. And here we have this, of 1716.060B1. So that reference, if we change the earlier subsection to D from C5, that takes care of it. My concern here that I just saw last night, I don't think we need to have the wording proposed for alteration, demolition, or relocation in this particular section because of the provision that says if a building permit is applied for, say, a house, and on that same parcel is the barn isn't being proposed for alteration, demolition, or relocation, but it would, if it's over 75 years old, should come under this section of this is where it would be determined whether it meets the criteria of 17.16.060B1.
I'm not sure I follow the
Well,
concern.
Okay, this determination does not necessarily, is not exclusively applicable to situations where the building that's proposed for alteration, demolition, or relocation is the subject. You get a building permit for a house and there's an old barn over here, if it's on the same parcel, this ordinance says that you will be studying the barn itself.
I don't believe it does.
Well, what, okay, then.
It only would kick in if they're actually proposing an alteration or demolition of the barn. Has nothing to do with
Okay,
someone
well,
wanting to build a new structure on a parcel that has
well,
an
then
historic
what
structure.
about
But
if-
we did say earlier that so if you were looking at a site and it has identified or listed resources on it, and any project is being proposed on that site, you would look to see whether it's going to impact that resource. If it's not, you're not going to do a big determination of anything. That's only if that resource has already been identified. Because otherwise, how would you know about it?
Right.
Well, I'm looking at F1, that the building official shall request the planning director's determination of whether or not the parcel on which the demolition, alteration, or relocation is proposed contains a listed building or structure as described in subsection 17. Okay. So if it does, I mean, then under subsection 2 of F, the building official will not issue a demolition permit until the conditional use permit has been approved. So then this gets back to a question I had when we originally looked at this. What about this? I mean, F1 brings the barn, in my example, into the picture.
Only if it's listed. If it's already a listed resource.
Can I suggest a possible change to one that might satisfy you? The planning director shall be responsible for determining whether the building or structure at issue meets the criteria of subsection blah, blah, blah.
That at least kicks the can down the road. That it's unclear to me then what we're doing about the barn in my example.
In my imagination, somebody comes in and they're going to do whatever. So whatever their project is, doesn't matter. And the building department is going to ask he's going to look to see if that building is already listed or anything on that property is already listed. If so, then you're going to assess the whole project in light of that. But if nothing is listed, but the building is 75 years old, that they're applying to do work on, to relocate, whatever it is, then the planning director is going to follow that to its conclusion, should that building be listed. But they're not going to go look at every other building on the property and see if those buildings should be listed.
Well,
Is
then,
that your?
Yes, I understand, or I see the point that Commissioner Laddish is making, though, is that in some cases, the overall site may be of importance, and adding a new structure right next to the barn or next to some other historic resources could adversely impact that.
So if it is already listed, you're going to be looking at that.
So what about whether a parcel on which, whether a parcel for which a project proposal has been submitted contains a building or structure? I don't know. I'm just thinking out loud. That meets the criteria.
well,
So I think we
It
need
says that
to,
now.
It says
It
that
already
now.
says that now.
if it is not listed and someone comes in with the building permit, we won't know anything about that. And I don't think there's anything in this ordinance, nor do I believe the board intended for us to research whatever other structures might be on the property. It would just be a simple building permit for a new house, in your example, Mr. Laddish. If it is listed, we could come up with some language that says we will review all properties that are listed prior to issuance of the building permit. And it could be something that, oh, that barn is, 200 feet away, a new house on the property is not going to affect it.
Kind of like the environmentally sensitive areas.
Right.
So, the planning director under C would only make a determination of meeting the criteria under 1716.060E1 as to the actual building structure that's proposed for alteration, demolition, or
That's the intent of this ordinance. Getting into reviewing a site for any building permit that has a listed structure or the site itself is listed is not included here. We could add it. I think it's a fairly simple addition to this section that says we'll also look at the list. I'm just thinking out loud of procedurally how we would do that. Someone comes with the building permit, and one of the things we would have to check on all building permits would be, is there a listed structure? Or is that on the list of the local list of historic resources that we need to consider before we issue that permit? So just be one more thing we'd have to check. I'm looking at the new boss over here to see if that's something that's reasonable.
I think that's a step that is, kind of going above and beyond and would be maybe setting staff up for making a mistake in checking on a ministerial building permit. And so it would be, additional work to staff and the ability where if they're looking at bad information, they, disseminate bad information as well. I'm not in favor of having to check every single building permit for.
Well, in that case,
I think it might be self-regulating in that if you're getting a building permit for a new structure, you have to show the site around it. So you will see if there are additional buildings that are within 20 feet or 50 feet or whatever, then, you have to see the whole site. So whether this new building is likely to impact an existing building, whether it's historic or not.
but then do we keep F1 the same about whether the planning, the request of the planning director will be whether or not the parcel on which the demolition or alteration or relocation is proposed contains a listing building or structure? Because but that's just the determination that you're concerned about, isn't
Or
it?
the difference is that they're already looking for this sort of a permit. Now, we're not trying to build something new, completely independent of.
Well, here it asks for the determination of whether the parcel contains a building, listed structure or structures as described, which would be structures that aren't on the list but meet the criteria for the local registry. And it seems to me that
They're looking.
Just a second. Seems to me that meets the concern that the planning director, excuse me, I don't mean to point at you.
It's okay.
It's the planning director.
But it says it. Yes. But it does say a listed building, not an eligible building.
Well, it says,
Yeah. In
as
start of
described.
section F, it says listed historical buildings. I'm just concerned that we'd be turning every building permit into a quasi discretionary process and not a ministerial process. And so
Well,
that'll add.
I think it could still be a ministerial process because you're only looking to see if it's already listed on our local register, period. One
Right.
step, and that could apply to any building permit, as long as we had easy access to that list for staff to look, and that's just one of the checkoff items, like, does it meet the setbacks? Does it meet the height? Is it in the right zone? Is there a listed resource on that property? I mean, maybe that would take care of it, and it would apply to a new construction, alterations, demolition, whatever.
Well,
So F is the procedural section
right.
that we have here. And I actually, at this point after this discussion, I would strike the word listed in the first part of F because the first time we see it, it may or may not be listed. We may find that it should be listed, and through this process it becomes listed, but it won't necessarily be listed initially.
And to be
But,
on the
but I
local
think this is
list.
saying if there's another, aside from,
Yeah, but what F1 then says is that before the building official issues the permit, he'll refer it to planning for our review to see if it meets the qualifications of B1, in which case then we go through this procedure.
And that's the
I don't think that's
only
it. I
way.
think this is trying to say, just a heads up, is there already a listed building on that thing? Then there's a second, you continue through and is it 75 years old? Then you need to look and see, is it eligible to be listed?
Well, listed is, the local list contains the state, the national and the state and all these others. And so if we're talking, if we eliminate the word listed here,
Potential.
well, that's, it becomes really complex here. I understand from what you have said, Peter, is that there isn't going to be a list made up by the planning department of all the structure. The local list is going to be made up of things that arise in the field, not a pre-existing list that once
And
this,
all
just a sec. That we're not going to have once this ordinance is enacted, the planning department isn't going to go make a local list that has the national and state listings on it, only then to add other things as they come up.
Correct. So the list will include the federal and state listed properties or structures and anything that is then added through this process. We are not going to proactively go out and search for buildings that could be on the list or should be on the list. That's not the directive that we've received.
This request from the building official triggers the investigation as to whether the building in issue meets the criteria, a part of which is whether they're on the national or the state, but it's
Right.
not, it's the building or the planning director isn't going to be looking at a list that the planning department has already made up
No.
of things.
But the archivist will already
there-
have the
yeah.
list of nationally and state.
Yeah, we have that
Those will
information.
already
It's
populate
available
our
on
local list.
the state website, the state parks
We don't have a
website.
local list
We,
until this
we,
happens.
we already have a local list. There are locally recognized buildings already.
But it's not official, something that we are saying.
Not the local
We're
register.
going to be, it's not this list. There are lists that have been created by the
Yes.
archivist, by interest groups that say, here are historical buildings that are not on the state or federal list, but could be listed or believe should be listed. But that's not the direction that we got from the board and that this ordinance is moving forward to at this point.
So in the past, I am aware of projects that requested a local listing in order to make use of the historic building code. And they had to go to the board for them to agree that they were locally significant. Where is that list? So there should be a local register that I suspect may not exist.
I'm unaware of, I think it's been on a case-by-case basis and I said, yes, go ahead and use it. I'm not aware of any list
Okay.
that the county maintains.
It says that the purpose of this ordinance in 1716 060A One is to establish the county's local register. So what I thought when I was helping draft this is that it would automatically include the state and federal list. And it's possible that if we come across other local buildings, they could indeed be, we wouldn't go affirmatively looking for them, but if in the process of doing a review of other properties, we came across something that it could be added to the list.
That had already been approved by
So
the
the
Board of
default is the
Supervisors.
local list, the default is that the local list is constituted
Right.
of the state and federal
Right.
properties. That is the local list.
But we don't have such a,
No, those lists of eligible properties are available to the county, is what we're trying to say. We do have those. But the word local list is a term of art for purposes of using other aspects of the code. And it was written to say the local list shall be constituted of those things in the state and federal lists. That's what we did. And then you can make it more expansive if you want to.
it seems to me we have two drafters here with opposite.
No, I think we're
No.
both all saying the same
There's
thing.
no existing list, is what.
There is not, to my awareness, any local list. This ordinance creates that, and by default, the state and federal lists will be on this list. Right now, they are listed. You can go to the state parks website and find what's listed in Calaveras County. And I don't remember the number, but there's quite a few. And this would then be something that the county would maintain over and above what is on the state and local list. So there would be resources that are identified through a discretionary project could be added. There would be resources that we identify through this process that would be added. And I've got language that would offer an opportunity for a property owner to request to be added. So that would create the new local listing.
And if we stumbled over something that had previously been acknowledged by the board, we would add
Certainly.
it to the list. We're just, nobody kept track of every time they did that over the past 40
Yeah.
years. That's what you're saying, right?
Right.
But those determinations were only if it was on a national state.
No, no, you could always ask, and I've done this in other places too, you can always go through the planning department to the Board of Supervisors and request that they make a proclamation that this building or site is locally, historically significant and allow you to use the California Historical Building Code. That was always the reason for doing it, is to get that flexibility. And those people didn't always go on to get a state or federal listing.
Okay.
So we should probably state in here, if we're gonna have a process for application or adding to the list, that it would be a determination of the Board of Supervisors. Like what you're saying procedurally is not in the ordinance.
Yeah, doesn't the board have to?
I don't know, I'm not aware of any.
Is what this ordinance does.
Right, but I think it has the next, just because the planning director and whatever committee it is determines that it is, I think the Board of Supervisors has to actually add it to the list. I don't know if that's actually a legal thing, that's always how
I think it's
always
practice.
been.
Yeah, I think it's just practice. I don't know. I think that
We could say.
we have stated here that the review process, if we make the determination, it becomes, it will be put on the list. It doesn't necessarily have to go to the planning, to the board. It would come to the planning commission as far as here are when we get into the narrow scope CEQA process for how do we protect this resource, it comes to you and could be appealed to the board. I think that certainly your action in reviewing one of these projects would constitute approval. I don't think it has to go to the board,
Yeah, I
but
just wondered why, and this is typical of other jurisdictions too, that always, that request always had to go to the board. I wonder if it's buried in something else because there was no official list to add to, so maybe they
there's-
needed an individual.
Nothing
Or
that I
maybe
found
everyone
in
just
my
felt more
research
comfortable with
that says that the board has to make that, take that
Yes,
action.
That's what this ordinance is
Yeah.
designed
Yeah.
to take care of. Okay, so back to F1. It's, we have, say, the house that's 25 years old, and they want to put a new wing on the front of the house. On that property, you have a barn that's 150 years old, whether it's on the National Estate List or not. Under F1, that gets referred to the planning director determination as to whether or not the barn is described in subsection 17.16.060. Then if under F2,
It says a listed building, so it has to be already have been
as
listed, that barn.
described in, yes, but that's the question. If you say listed, okay, under F2, if the parcel contains a listed building, okay, then the only purpose of having the barn on this parcel, and it's part of this program, is that the conditional use permit will take into account the historic nature of that barn. But that barn, are you saying that the determination of the building, of the planning director, will not include anything other than whether it's listed? Because the planning director's determination is whether it meets the criteria of subsection 17.16.060B1, which would include, if it's not listed on the national or state list, the considerations under B.
I think we're talking apples and oranges here. So F talks about our review of the proposed demo or relocation or alteration. It does not address new construction on a parcel. I think if you want to include what you're referring to, building a new building on something that has a listed structure, we should add a separate section. And I would strike the word listed every time it's brought up under F, because I think that was a mistake on our part to add the word listed because it's not yet listed, or potentially not yet listed.
I think that maybe two different ideas were going on when this was drafted and what we're talking about right now. I think this section was saying if there's any listed building on the property, you need to look at the project and see if it's going to impact that listed building. But I don't think that's what we intended for it to say. I think the intention was if the project itself was was part of the listed resource. So, what are we really, are we trying to protect listed resources on the property from a project? Or are we only talking about the project itself being on a list, part of a listed resource?
If we added a section above
Yes.
that says, here's how it gets on a local list, and just say it's either on the state or national, or it's found through the process of something else, or somebody asks to have it put on the list, okay? And then that's how you get on a local list. Then later, if there's any project that involves any of those things, including one that's just been added, it would make sense to say listed
But that doesn't take care of the problem with F2. F2 seems to imply that even if your project is an alteration to a 10-year-old building that's on a piece of property that has an additional listed structure on it, that you're going to need a conditional use permit. And I don't think that was our intention. If the project, I think it's just to assess whether it would impact that listed resource. If it doesn't impact the listed resource, then why would they need a conditional use permit?
Would that be a part of the planning director's determination under C1? I mean, should we add something to that, or I think it's very unclear just what happens if there is
There is nothing in this draft that talks about what you're referring to. Right now, it only addresses the proposed demolition, relocation, or alteration of a structure.
Well, then.
There
do we
isn't
want to
anything
have-
in this, and so I guess I suggest that if we want to add that, we don't try to convolute these sections here to talk about how we look at a demo permit. But if there is a building permit, new construction proposed on a parcel, and it happens to contain a listed structure on it, that we review that to see if that proposed building permit affects that existing structure. Because this process does not address that in any way.
I don't see where this process addresses the barn in our.
It doesn't, that's what I'm saying, it does not. Or it could be, a historical store in, downtown McCollum Hill, and someone wants to build a new store right next to it, and that new store somehow impacts the way that the setting of the existing structure. That's not addressed because the direction that we received was concern about demolition or alteration of existing historic structures.
Well, then, in that limited view, should, and I hesitate to say this, should we take out this bit about whether the parcel contains?
I think that the reason we use the word parcel in this section is that is how we look at building permits. They come in, there's a parcel that is, and that enables us to then, that's just our reference point. Everything is based on parcel data that we have. That's why we refer to parcel. And I think we're getting mixed up between just how we review a proposed demo permit. I'm going to use that rather than all three, just for brevity's sake. A demo permit on a parcel, and we look at the building that is proposed to be demolished. And there's nothing in this ordinance that says if a new building is proposed on a parcel, we would look to see what other structures are out there and if those other structures are historic and if this new building permit might have an effect on that.
Well, then,
I think F2 needs to be modified because it seems to imply that if there is a listed building on the parcel at all, that the project, whether or not it pertains to the listed building, needs a conditional use permit. So
I agree with
I
you.
think we just need to clarify that, and then we'll be back to where we were, which is we're really only talking about if you're impacting that listed building or structure. I think this is, I agree with Peter that the intention of one is just, you've got to look at the parcel number and then that's how you find out what's on that parcel and all sorts of other things about the parcel. So I think we just need to clarify that.
but we would also need to clarify if we don't intend for the process of the planning director under C1 to include the considerations under BC about the aside from national and local listings, this is a way that something becomes listed. Well, we need to clarify because Peter is suggesting we get rid of the word listed. In F1. So that would mean the planning director would need to make look at entire 1716.060B1 to see whether it is described in that section. And that includes things that aren't listed on the national and or state list or eligible for listing under the list. But I agree with the chair that the F2 needs to be clarified really as to what the conditional use permit, since there's no change being suggested directly on the barn in our hypothetical. Just what is the conditional use permit considerations need to be? Because when we get back to what the review commission or the review body does, it's, well, okay, I'm changing my sentence.
I have a suggestion.
Oh, good.
Not perfect wording, but just an idea.
Yeah.
If we just looked at F2 and said, and this might not correct everything else, but if the parcel contains a listed building or structure as described in subsection 1, and the proposed project has the potential to impact the listed resource, the chief building official shall not issue a demolition.
I was going to suggest maybe a simplified form, but maybe yours is better. We just say, if the proposed project affects a building or structure described in, and that would be the same for 2 and 3, and then we strike the word listed in the first line of F itself.
I think some of the confusion is that if you look at the panel tasks, as drafted, the panel would make the decision about whether there would be an impact to any historic structure.
Potential to impact.
So I think the intent was originally that, okay, if there's one on the parcel, we need to figure out if the thing proposed is going to impact.
Exactly.
And that if the panel was going to decide that, and if it's not going to impact it, then there wouldn't be any conditions of approval. They're done.
Exactly. And they wouldn't need a conditional use permit application if it has no potential.
But that's, so I think the question is, I think part of it is the procedure by which it gets in front of the panel a CUP application or not. That's where I think, because I think as drafted, the assumption was, okay, this parcel contains some sort of building, and it's hard to tell whether building this other thing over here is going to affect this thing over here. And so therefore, we're going to take it to the panel through a CUP application, and they're going to determine if it's significant or not.
Julie, you're adding something that's not in the ordinance, because we're only looking at this if there is a demo, alteration, or relocation permit. There's nothing in here that says we're going to look at a site if there is a new building permit.
Right, so if you're altering a house, and the question is whether altering the house is going to have an impact on the barn 50 yards away from it, that's what we were looking at. And it was going to be the panel that determined whether there was a potentially significant impact. And if the panel stopped and said it's so far away it's not going to matter, then they were going to...
But the question is, how does it get in front of the panel?
Right.
Does there have to be an application before it gets, a CUP application before it gets in front of?
Well, so the first step would be the planning director would look at the building permit application and say, oh, that structure is over 75 years old. And that would be the first key. And then at that point, we say, well, okay, now is it historically significant? At that point, the panel comes in and we look at the historical significance of it and determine that, there are thousands of similar structures. I mean, the house I grew up in San Jose is like, that's not historically significant.
The building building we're talking about, but if we're talking about impacts on an adjacent already listed resource, that's
So I
where
think
it
we would
falls
need to
apart.
add something, if that's what you want, is that if there is, because I have to disagree with Julie on this, that that's not the process that, I understood what was wanted
That's
here.
what it says.
But-
So we need to change it.
Yeah.
That's all we're saying.
Yeah,
There's a
and so,
disconnect between what we're saying
so-
and what is written.
it only kicks in if there's a demo permit.
Or.
Or an
Or alteration, yeah.
or
And I'm using demo as the shorthand for alternate.
Shorthand.
Right.
So the demo permit that's applied, but if someone applies for a new building permit,
Right.
this would not,
Yeah.
in fact, so if you want something that the county will review a new building permit against listed parcels, listed sites, that's something that we would need to add to your recommendation to the board, to add to that.
And,
I do agree with you, Peter. I do think it's
Yeah,
just
and-
looking at what it
no,
says.
and Julie, I think you've made, I mean, you've tied the sections together well. It gets me back. So if we take listed out of, let's see. Well, no, but Peter is suggesting we take listed out of F1 and F2. If we take it out, then it makes it clear that we are, in our hypothetical, the barn is to be considered, even if it's not on a national or state list. Then it gets me back to C1, that the planning director shall be responsible for determining whether a building or structure meets the criteria. Under those circumstances, the words proposed for alteration, demolition, or relocation should be taken out, because you'd be looking at the barn on this property rather than the house.
So that is an expansion of the direction that we got from the board on the urgency ordinance.
So, I have a suggestion
Yeah.
here. So there's two things that could be done. One is this could be expanded the way Commissioner Ladish is describing. And one is we could narrow it back to what we thought by correcting this wording or adjusting this wording to say that it's the proposed project that we're looking at, not other buildings that might be listed on the property, unless the project is literally attaching to it or impacting it in some way. So conceptually, what do you guys think? Because we're spending time wordsmithing things we're probably not going to do. Okay.
But what is your understanding of what do you want?
Well, I think we can take out listed. I mean, you can,
Well, I think that will make it worse because now we're opening it up to any building and we're going to look and see if it is eligible to be listed. I think we just need to narrow it to the project and make sure that the project that we're looking at is either listed or it has an impact on a listed property. That's it. But they don't, if it doesn't have any impact,
we don't want to
Whether-
make it too onerous.
yeah, exactly.
The concern though is by putting the word,
Yeah,
So how do we narrow it
it
then?
feels onerous.
How do we narrow it?
the problem that we see, I see here with, and I agree with you as far as talking about narrow it to the proposed project, not to the parcel. But if we have the word listed, if it's not already listed, but it should be listed,
Yeah.
then we're saying it's not listed, ignore it.
Well,
And
I
so
just
that
think
we've
once
got the
you-
cart before the horse here.
Well, I think if you can take a look at those wordings and make sure that you're talking about, to me, this is talking about something that's already listed, the way it's written,
Right.
right?
And what we're
And you
saying,
wanna
what
say,
we're trying to
or-
say,
or
we,
it will be listed as a result of this
Right.
project. So I just think the wording on this section F needs to get aligned to what you're really trying to do.
I understand.
That's all I'm
Yeah.
saying.
Can we narrow?
So
See how
Yes,
that
that's what-
feels.
let's,
So
let's,
that's what we're
Yeah.
talking about.
Yeah, let's just.
and I think Sarah is asking, what do you guys want to do?
What do you
As
wanna
a
do? Do you
commission,
wanna narrow it or
Do you
broaden it?
want
My
to
question-
keep it solely to the demo, alteration, relocation
I think we should.
of those structures? Or do you want to expand it to look at other buildings that aren't being proposed for relocation?
Narrowing it, I think,
Demolition.
is the way to go. My question is, can you use the terminology potentially listed without messing things up?
That's pretty broad.
I think only, we can say that if
I said it
it
originally,
only,
but I think that's pretty broad.
but that's only would apply to the project structure itself. I think the problem is when we take out listed, when we're talking about other buildings on the property. The only way that we would be talking about other buildings on the property is if they are already listed and we are potentially impacting them.
That's
Not
that's what you're
eligible
doing.
for listing.
That's the proposal.
That's what I think our original intention was. Now you're talking about, are those buildings, do we inadvertently identify that those buildings are eligible for listing and list them? And I would be opposed to doing that.
Is this a question as far as the other parcels on property? Should we put off that question, as I'm suggesting, we put off the question about maintenance and repair until a further thing, so we can get this on the books in time to avoid the,
But we still have to clarify this wording, even if we want to stick with
Well-
the original intent.
Peter, do you have an understanding of what the board wanted with regard to other buildings on the parcel?
They did not address that in the adoption of the urgency ordinance. It was strictly a concern about the demolition and alteration of existing historic structures.
Actually, not even
Well,
alteration.
there was discussion of the board, but the board, in order to pass the urgency ordinance, narrowed it to just demolition. I believe that under the general plan, we need to look at alteration. And so we've expanded that beyond what the urgency ordinance says in order to be consistent with the general plan.
In order to gain, therefore, in order to gain approval of the board of our ordinance, we should perhaps have it rather narrow and not consider other buildings on the parcel, but keep that question alive to fine tune it the way we've been discussing, for later determination. Because if the board only had the emergency ordinance cover demolition, that's quite a narrow approach. And it seems to me that although I love barns, I want them to be preserved. I think maybe to get it in a form that the board can approve, maybe we should not broaden.
I think that's probably a good strategic move, and I think that we can certainly bring up the subject with the board when we take this ordinance, that this was a concern of the commission and we did not include it, but the board would have the ability to add language to that. I think it's been fully discussed here in the planning commission, so we wouldn't have to come back to the commission if they wanted to add something like
We
that.
should take a clean first go at this to the board and not muddy the waters with expanding it until we see how it works.
But
Right? And
that's-
then I think a year from now, we can look at it again. If, how often is this coming up at all? And do we see that as potentially an issue that we need to look at more closely? I definitely do
think-
not think we should add in new construction at this point.
Okay.
And
That's a common sense approach.
Yeah, I would agree, and I think then that simply altering F2 and F3 to refer to the project as opposed to the parcel. And I do think we need to take out the word listed in the beginning of F.
yeah,
That would,
With your new approach,
yeah, that would then satisfy this issue to, narrow the focus, get a clean ordinance to the board, and we can address this
And-
other expanded look at
and
these.
for now, take out the reference to the whether or not this is an F1, whether or not the parcel it contains a listed
yes.
building.
Well, I think that's how you initially, I just identify that you even need to look at it more closely.
No, you have to, what would have left would be the building official shall request the planning director determination of whether the demolition, alteration, or relocation proposed involves
But yeah, that would be fine.
involves a building or structure as
Yeah.
described.
Yeah. Okay.
Sorry.
Oh my God, are we done? Are we done with F, folks?
I'll just say I very much appreciate the narrowing the focus and from a functionality standpoint and staff and whether you need a CUP or not and delaying a building permit and while these determinations are made, I think a narrow determination at this point is a great starting point and would be a great starting point to get staff up and running on this new process before we start talking about expanded buildings on the site. So thank
You
you
don't
for
need to
that.
make it any more difficult to get a permit.
And we also don't want to be taking in conditional use permit fees,
Right.
which are very expensive,
Yes.
as you know, and then having to either refund or, that causes stress to the public as well. So.
In that, as a culmination of all that, I withdraw my suggestion that we, in C1, that we take out proposed for alteration, demolition, or relocation, because that's exactly what we're talking about.
Okay, yes, exactly.
Right. I think he's got it.
Yeah, I think we've got it. Good catch on one. I missed that one. We had jumped from C to F. Was there anything under D or E? And I do have something I would like to add to E.
Well, E, I do have my question as to, we're talking local register of historical buildings and places, that this is the only place in the the place in this ordinance where places are mentioned, and then there's a mention of sites in E2, but there aren't any review provisions. The rest of this proposed ordinance is only for historical buildings and
So the
structure.
register would contain sites. There are a number of those that are state and federally listed. And because we're adopting those as part of our register, I think we need, the two terms are used sort of interchangeably. We might want to just be consistent with using places or sites. Probably places is
But it's
better because I think that's what's
okay,
used.
But it's
I
a,
think places is better than site.
COS AG specifically says we have to establish a county register of historic places.
okay,
I think that's where that came from.
okay, but we aren't, in this ordinance, we won't be providing anything for determination on a local basis of whether a site should be
Sort
added
of.
if it isn't already listed.
We're referring back to state and federal determinations.
That's
So,
right.
and
Okay.
someone could request it.
Okay, do we want to say in the heading for E, local register of historical buildings, structures, and places?
Yes. And then, since this is the part where we talk about establishing the local register, I was going to suggest we add E3, which says a property owner may voluntarily request to have a building, structure, or place added to the local register of historic resources if such resource meets the criteria for listing.
And should we there refer to the planning director's determination under C1?
No, because I don't know that we need to go into that level of detail.
Because, I mean, well, if they apply, who makes the decision?
Okay.
Right, you still have to.
Okay, I think,
I think a reference
the criteria for listing as established.
as determined by the planning director under C1.
But it would be the same criteria that
Yeah,
4 items.
yeah. But then we've got it in there, that
Perfect.
this is the way to do this.
Well, that takes care of that one.
Well, let me- And we're referring back to,
Was there any Mills Act? We didn't even talk about D. We kind of, C took us into E and F and we got all garbled.
I don't
So,
see a problem with D as it exists.
uh, with the Peter's proposed edit.
I forgot what that was, but I'm sure
Yeah,
it was fine.
we took out the stuff about the single-family residence and all that.
Oh, yeah,
Wasn't
that,
applicable.
oh, right. No, as Peter is currently proposing.
Yes.
D is great. I do think, that in E, under E1B, it should be reading, have been determined by the State Historical Resources Commission to be eligible for listing in the National Register of Historic Places or the California
yeah,
Register.
that's fine.
of Historic Resources.
Yeah.
Okay, and then there's my various corrections through this of subsection letters. I think I finally got them straight. So I don't know that we need to go through each one
No,
if you accept those.
I wasn't sure they were, that the corrected.
We will
one,
make
the
sure that
original
the-
was quite right.
yeah,
So if you
we
could just
will go back
double
through and do
check
a
once
fine
everything's
tooth
numbered and-
review of the references and the numbering to make sure it's all correct.
Yeah.
Okay, G, limited scope conditional use permit. Do you have anything else first?
No.
Okay,
It's G. We're on G.
this is the same kinds of
Well,
adjustments.
well, but I mean, not, there is, I think, we need to make the change that I propose, that where it says review of the application for a conditional use permit. I think we need to say review of the potential issuance of a conditional use permit. Because when we have a building permit application, there has been no application for a conditional use permit. So that's why I'm suggesting we change the language there.
So under F2 is the first time this conditional use permit is referenced.
Yeah, no, I'm.
Yeah.
That's fine. And I realize that we've got to be issuing a conditional use permit. But and we're only here talking about demolition, alteration, and relocation. So we're talking about a situation where the only permit application has been for demolition, alteration, or relocation. There is no application for a conditional use permit in that context. It should, so we shouldn't, nobody has applied for a conditional use permit.
When,
for
until the building official tells them they need to.
I
Or
don't
tells
see,
them to
that
be
isn't,
reviewed by the planning.
that isn't the way the ordinance is written.
It doesn't say they have to apply. It just says that
Yes.
we have to have a conditional use
Right,
permit.
so
And
that's why I'm saying that,
I think that's a procedural issue that the planning department will develop, and maybe we just don't say application, we just say review of the conditional use permit.
yeah, well, that's why I suggested potential issuance of.
It just seems a little bit convoluted. I think if we just we strike the word application, but don't add potential issuance. We just say review the conditional use permit, because that's
Okay.
what planning does.
That's fine, that's fine.
Brad, do you?
We get rid of
Agree with that?
application, that's fine.
Yeah, I like that edit. I think that's good.
Right.
Okay.
So in G2, it doesn't address the possibility that the application could be denied, that there would not be any conditions that would allow them to do the project that they want to do.
Well, no, but it gets down to it, that think there's somewhere it says, if you can't come up with enough conditions, it'll be denied.
Yeah, it's the next line down, 3. Will not suffice to reduce potential impacts, to lucid historical structure, less than the
Which one are you
use
on?
permit may, G3, use permit may be denied.
Yeah,
Oh, there it is, okay.
yeah,
Yeah.
okay. Then, I have a suggestion on G3. That if you have a situation where somebody asks for a building permit, and it really involves safety, you might have a situation where you might have to well, maybe this would be taken care of with the conditions.
I think so.
That's where we're going, okay.
And there was somewhere else that says nothing, you can't be
Right.
prevented from making safety improvements.
Yes. But still, we need to change in G3, take the word application, and just say the conditional use permit may be denied.
That's fine.
Okay, then in G5, there's the sentence at the last sentence, all discretionary use permit applications, I'm suggesting we add and procedures under subsection 17.06.060.f that trigger the application of this chapter shall be processed, blah, blah. Now, it isn't just the applications, it's when things are triggered by the building permit application and the reference to the planning director and all that.
But it says, it's really only an application that is going to be processed under the use permit guidelines. The procedures aren't going to be processed under that.
No, we're talking about applications and procedures that trigger the application of this chapter. Again, what we're talking about here are the building permit things that trigger the application of this chapter. There is no use permit application in that context.
But here they're only talking about things that that independently require discretionary use approval anyway.
No, but that's that first sentence, yes.
I would have to agree with Michelle on this, that this talks about processing, and it just says we're going to process it as we would under chapter 1731. This review under F is not part of it. This is what triggers the use permit. It is not part of the use permit process.
I understand what he's trying to say,
Yeah.
though, that the triggering, but
Yeah.
I don't
I mean,
think it matters. I think
it's clear
we
that-
are.
It's clear that the intent is clear, and I was just trying to clarify that when you have things triggered under F, that you're going to follow the conditional use permit provisions under.
Okay, I see what you mean.
Under,
I'm okay with that. That's fine.
The citation's wrong.
Just so you know.
Yeah.
It's 16, not 06.
oh,
That's okay. Wait, I've caught that. And also, it should be into this section, not chapter. But we'll correct those little things.
so you're okay with
Yeah,
that?
I'm okay with that.
And the rest of the commission okay with that? Sure.
I don't think it matters. I don't
Yeah.
feel like it's
Yeah.
important one way or the other.
No, it's clarification. Okay, now H, do we want to have a discussion about H right now?
Yes, if we're done with G, we want to talk about H.
Okay. I think there are valid, well, I think it is, I would love to see all historic buildings of significance preserved in the county. I mean, my own personal thing, if I were a multi-millionaire, billionaire, or whatever, I would have a foundation out there preserving barns. I mean, I don't know a thing on barns. But I think there's some possible bad effects of the requirements of subsection H. First, there's a real possibility, which lurks behind this entire ordinance, that people just aren't going to apply for building permits when they should, because they might be aware that it's going to trigger this whole process and impair their independence and the treatment of their property and this sort of thing.
Tim, before we go on to that,
Yeah.
can we just talk about the county archivist in that first section, and
Sure.
then we can get down into this bigger question?
Yeah.
So, do we all agree that we need to take county archivist out because the county archivist does not have this work in their work description?
Well, and also this makes a 4-member
Yes.
board,
Exactly.
and I have the
Yeah.
problem
All
if
of that.
there's a tie.
If it was an addition we made, it kind of seemed like a good idea, but now it's more complicated.
Yeah.
Okay. Okay, now go on with your.
Well, while we're on county archivists, then from my discussion before, do we want to have any mention of the county archivist in this ordinance, or relying upon the common sense of the planning department to be aware, which many departments apparently are not, that the county archivist exists and the function and as a resource for
I think that it's going to be a resource. I'm sure that planning department will utilize that resource, and there may be other resources out there. And so by identifying just that one, we may overlook other resources. I think it's better to keep it open so that, whoever is reviewing these can go to whatever resource is available to make that determination. And it could be someone other than the archivist.
From the planning department.
Absolutely, and we do that all the time in different various projects. We go to the experts that we have access to, and we lean on those experts. And in this case, we'd be reaching out to the county archivist, I would imagine quite a bit, and trying to, elicit responses or checking on things. So we do that in temporary use permits, conditional use permits, every type of application that we get. We think about what's the best resource that we have and who's available to us. So absolutely.
If you're going to have, I don't know if this is something that you would do, departmental procedures, once this ordinance is enacted.
Right.
If you have such procedures, can we be assured that you will include a reference to the county archivist?
Absolutely. We'll derive a checklist for the line planners to go through when this comes up, and I'll make sure that that's on the checklist.
Okay.
Who will be maintaining the new local register? Is the planning department going to be the owner of that, or
Yeah,
will be our?
I believe we will be absorbing that, and I have
Okay.
several staff members in mind that this will be coming to them.
Lucky them.
Good building.
Okay. All right,
Okay.
now let's get back to
All right. I'm very concerned about the expenses that could be required of citizens on this, we're back on repair and maintenance page, which is not, it is a separate category and it's separate buildings. I mean, it doesn't have to be involved with a building permit or whatever. That requiring owners to keep up the structure. Well, let's take an example. We have a 125-year-old barn on a property with a 50-year-old house. The barn has its original exterior, is of classic foothills, rural design, was once owned by Bret Hart, who spent all his summers there. It would qualify for this, for inclusion. But the barn's roof is deteriorating, it's letting weather weaken its structural integrity, parts of its sides are starting to fall off. This barn, in 10 years, will be on the ground. So if
Or you can use the Ramaji Adobe as an example.
yeah, well, you could, yeah, similar thing. So if no permit is requested, will the barn be subject to the maintenance and repair section? It appears to me that it would by the terms that it's.
Are we on J
I was
now?
gonna say, I thought we were in.
We skipped a whole bunch.
Yeah, we've skipped like 2 pages.
I'm sorry.
Yeah,
I
we
would-
finished G and we're looking at H.
Yeah, I thought we were on to H. Okay.
Yeah,
So there's other language in H
yes.
that, in addition to the issue of the archivist, that precedes the
Right.
archivist.
Exactly.
That's where I thought we were.
Oh, I'm sorry.
Yeah,
I'm
so we're
sorry.
just right past
Jumping.
archivist and looking at section 2.
Yeah.
Well, we didn't even address your proposed language under H1.
Just
Okay.
remember my barn. We'll get back to
Yeah.
it.
Yes.
I won't go through all those.
Put a
facts.
pin in
We'll
it.
be coming back to
Yes.
that. We're not gonna forget.
Okay.
So bottom of page 5, H1, you're suggesting some additional language. And I'm not sure that it's necessary. I don't really quite understand the purpose of this.
All right, well, again, your version is saying after an application for a limited scope conditional use permit under this chapter has been submitted to the planning department. Won't this apply to the demolition, et cetera,
The first
Well, there
initial
is no-
review of it?
whether there's been no application. And so it seems to me that really we want to just say, after the planning director has made a determination under subsection so that a subject building or structure is described in subsection 171606B1.
They'll be told to apply.
It's the very first thing, H1, is after an application for a limited scope conditional use permit.
But
This whole
where is
section.
that application?
They've been told from
We've had
above.
an application for a building permit. We've never said, then there has to be an application.
It says that
Yes,
they'll
under
be.
F2.
Yeah, it does.
Yeah.
It's up here.
Go back.
Thought,
Yeah, F2.
yeah. Shall not issue until a conditional use permit
Yeah.
as described
Oh, sure.
has been approved.
That's clear. There needs to be a conditional use permit. But that doesn't say, oh, now we're going to turn back to the owner and say, now you have to apply for conditional use permit. It's this procedure latches onto the conditional use permit procedure, which I think makes a whole lot of sense, without requiring a separate application. Only application here is for building permit, demolition, et cetera.
So,
Oh, no, I think they have to apply for a limited scope conditional
Yeah.
use permit.
Well, they don't want it. You know,
Then they don't get their building
They don't
permit.
get a building permit.
okay, but then it seems to me we have to make clear in F2 that somewhere there has to be an application, because the way I read it, there didn't need to be an application, you just went into the conditional use permit process. And I don't,
I can see how you got there, actually, now that I'm
well, good.
Yeah.
looking at it from your perspective. But
And I don't see why we would require an additional
because it's gonna cost money and they have to pay the fee.
oh boy. Yeah.
Because someone's spending time on this.
I mean, it's really no different than any other use permit application. You know, if there's a list of uses, these uses permitted by right, these uses require a use permit, we don't say, and you have to apply for it. it's a given.
Yeah.
Well, it wasn't to me reading the ordinance.
Yeah, they'll clarify it, as God says.
We can,
It'll be very.
But I can certainly see
We can
somebody-
add,
Yes,
applied for and approved,
Right.
F2.
Yeah, F2
Yeah.
applied.
okay,
applied for.
that's great. That's great. In that case,
So I have a side comment here that kind of applies to all these things we've been talking about, and this is nothing to go into the ordinance. A suggestion that there is a handout that goes along with the application that says this is the flow chart for how this works. Or even from the building department can hand it out that says, you know, we've determined your building's 75 years old. This is what's gonna happen. They're gonna go through this. And these are all your off ramps where a determination maybe you don't even go on to the next step, but
We can provide a fact sheet with the application, and also put a fact sheet on the website.
I just think if you can see, you know, here's the process and here's how you get down to where you're actually submitting that application and moving into the more detailed portion of it.
Yeah.
Anyway, that's all I have to say.
okay. Okay, so we're requiring the application, and then if we're requiring the application, then I don't have a problem with what's. Let's see, where are we?
so the second part of your edits on H1, I think keeping the word application is appropriate at this point. Bottom of page 5.
Yeah, right. Okay, so, yes, my, okay. Then, yeah, my suggestions are apt.
Yeah.
But we do have to have the specifics that they will be required to apply.
Yes,
Okay,
and we took care of that in F2.
yeah, great.
Okay.
Then subsection 2A, the draft says, talks about potentially significant impacts to a listed historical building or structure pursuant to subsection 17.6. My suggestion is we take out pursuant to and put in described in, because subsection 17.16.060.B1 is a description of what can be included. It doesn't provide any procedures that you would be doing anything pursuant to. That's the reason I suggested described in. And that applies to subsections B and C as well. Do you see my point?
Yeah, I
Yeah.
think if Peter's okay with the language, I think we're okay with that change as well.
Yeah, that's fine.
Okay, now they say that applies to B and C also.
Yeah. Your change was better than mine. Now that we've had all these other discussions. I don't have anything much else here. So can we move?
To I,
There are a few just citations that need to be double checked.
Yeah.
The F's and the H's and the 2's and the 3's with wherever we're at now. But I don't,
I
Well,
thought,
we
I thought
will-
I finally got it straight.
yeah, but we've messed with it further a little bit,
Oh,
so
okay.
just,
I think we're down to I2.
Yeah,
And I think we had this discussion previously about potentially significant and the nuances of CEQA. I think if we start talking, adding that kind of language in, it gets us into,
oh, that was, now I remember our discussion.
Yeah.
Okay. Okay.
so I would not add that word. I would just,
Okay.
yeah.
Whenever we get to
Exactly.
CEQA bombshells,
Yes. to Julie on any
No,
language you
good catch, Peter. Good catch. Yeah, that could cause us some issues later.
Yeah.
Right. So now we're to section J unless somebody has something prior to that. And this is the real big. And I say, Julie, question? It's not.
Legally can people do affirmative maintenance obligations. I don't want to get into all the details, but the more you require and the more we get away from people who are actually asking for something from us, the more potential of constitutional issues could come up. And so it's a policy decision. The board direction didn't go that far. I don't know how the board would feel about adding affirmative maintenance obligations, but it's really a policy decision, but the county is going to have to look on a case-by-case basis. I mean, I'm going to give an example. Hypothetically, you have a 40-acre parcel. Somebody has a slowly depreciating manufactured home on there that's worth all of $100,000. In a far corner, it turns out there's an old barn that they didn't know was a thing. It turns out it is a thing. The roof is the issue. The roof is $50,000 to repair. We start getting into a point where if they're not asking us for a permit, to what extent do we make them fix it, and is that constitutional?
Yeah,
Well, but we were talking only about buildings that are listed. So that barn, that we specifically said that, a listed resource or historical building. So if they have a barn out there, unless somebody has gone to the trouble of having it listed, it would even.
I guess I don't know whether something would be, I don't know the extent to which when somebody buys a property, they're expected to know if some structure on it is eligible for listing, if that is on part
Not
of their due
eligible, we didn't say eligible.
Well, no, but
Listed.
listed.
I would
Listed
suspect
includes
that that would be a disclosure requirement of the realtor, that anyone buying property with a listed
Yeah. they have to
resource on it would know.
Disclose that.
Yeah.
And if it's eligible for listing, it's on the state list.
No,
No.
not necessarily. They're separate. Eligible and listed are separate categories.
On the state list.
It's gonna tell you whether it's listed or it's eligible for listing. So I think only if it's actually, somebody has gone to the trouble of listing it, would you be, I might wish that people would preserve everything, but I don't wanna tell people they have to do that.
So I'm curious, can a neighbor then say, look, that's a historic building, take it to the county, and the county says, that cannot happen, right?
No.
Okay.
Well, wait a minute. That's part of what I wonder. If according to the terms of E1, if the barn is listed or has been determined by the state to be eligible for listing on either the national or state list, it's to be included in the local register of historic resources. You're saying that doesn't really have an independent,
Where did we say that?
look back to E1.
CEQA will require looking at buildings that are eligible for listing, not just ones that are actually listed.
But I think we
What
get
do
to the
you-
base, and by the way,
If you're
I
doing work on that building, not if you're not asking for anything,
think,
right?
I think Julia Costello has something she'd like to add.
Well, hang on, let's finish this
Okay.
and then we'll ask her to come up here.
Oh.
Well, I think that, Tim, you're right. In the language of E1, it says that it will be on the local list if it is eligible for listing on the national register or the state register.
And,
Have been determined by the State Historical Resources Commission to be eligible for listing.
but under F1, it takes a permit application to trigger the determination under C1.
But if we have established this list, and it includes A, B, and C under E1, then when we go back to this maintenance and repair section, that if it is a listed building, it would be if it's eligible for state or federal
Well, it
listing.
doesn't say listed where, for one thing, so we would need to say what listing it is. Are we saying that anytime it says listed, that means our local registry.
And state and federal.
Well, that would be the
That-
intent,
yeah.
because again, the review of these proposals would not necessarily include things that are on the state. These would be the locally important ones that we would then add to the list.
So anything that's on a list, anything that's eligible for a state or federal list, and anything else that we put on the local list, which also includes eligible, CEQA does require us that all of those are considered historic resources under CEQA. Once we create that list, we do have to treat them as historic resources. If you're adding an affirmative maintenance obligation that's not required elsewhere, then you could specify what you want it to apply to. And
I'd
you
like
can
to-
make it more narrow if you wanted to.
I'd like to point out that when I first read the draft, I was concerned about the burdens that would be placing on the owners that haven't applied for any permit or anything. That concern was quite a bit lessened when I was reading the findings that would propose that the Board of Supervisors make. And under finding L, it says the availability of hardship waivers and variance applications to existing state and local laws and regulations will provide an opportunity for an owner with a unique circumstance to review the application of this ordinance as it applies to their particular circumstances. But I don't see how that works. The proposed ordinance itself does not set out fines for violations. The hardship waivers, all the ones that I'm aware of, only provide for possible and limited waivers of fines for violations of ordinances. I'm not aware of any hardship waivers that would lessen or remove the obligation to maintain and repair a historic structure.
So counties that do affirmative, one of the materials I sent to the commission as well, when a jurisdiction wants to add affirmative maintenance obligations, they also tend to provide, because I think to make sort of a preemptive safety valve against constitutional challenge, to have some means by which that type of hardship of having to do it, you add a different type. Now, I was also, when I initially drafted the finding, under the apparently false impression that the building department already had something in place for this type of a thing, and they do not. So we would have to create it.
So, again, I'm suggesting that this, since it's a step further, several steps further than what the board accomplished in its emergency ordinance, that this also be put on the taken out of our current draft and considered later as to exactly how we would deal with hardship. I just don't think that the county and whether it's constitutional or not, that the county should be stepping in and requiring somebody who is impoverished, which they may well be if their buildings are falling apart, to pay for repair and maintenance if they can't, if that means, that their food and whatever budget is going to be impacted. I think this is something that needs to be looked at further.
I'm wondering, just one moment, and I'll ask you to come up, where the requirement to maintain the buildings in a safe condition is now, because that exists. Building department would go out and red tag a falling down building and tell the people to repair it.
Or tear it down.
Or tear it down. Right, exactly.
Yeah.
Right, so, but could we look at what that language is, and maybe today is not the day that we can solve this. Anyway,
As I started
did
by-
you have something pertinent to this you want to add?
I was just gonna, in the demolition by neglect, that the Murphy School is on everyone's agenda, that is being allowed to deteriorate. Veterans Memorial District now owns it. They have the money, they're choosing not to repair it. Anyway, that would be a case that this might apply to. It's clearly a historic landmark. And also, I just want you to indulge me, I have a vet appointment at 11 and a dog in the car, that I just wanted to ask if the list is going to be the Calaveras County Register of Historic Resources will be a public list. In other words, they would be, once it's devised, it would be available online or
Have
to
be,
people.
right?
Yeah, I think so.
The only exception would be, and this is outside of the context, but as I think you already know, if there were Native American
Yes.
artifacts,
Yes,
et cetera.
no, those would be
That
the-
would have to not be.
The
but-
archaeological sites,
right.
but people will be able to check and see if buildings are on it or
Yeah.
ask their student.
Absolutely.
But it's, as I understand it, it's not going to come into being, it's going to come into being only when there are these permit applications.
No, it will immediately be created and populated with the state.
But it will have,
and
yes,
federal
yes, it will have the state and federal listing, and then those things that come through this process will be
Okay.
added to or by voluntary action of the property
Okay,
owner.
great.
Right,
That's
and,
marvelous.
and also there's many more properties determined eligible for the National Estate Register that aren't technically listed. And those, I don't believe you can get online. That's what goes through our clearinghouse here, where a project is done, you determine it eligible. So it's not going to be listed, but it's determined eligible by the state. And those would all be on the list.
Right, but.
Yeah, so we do have a big
want them
list.
sorted because the idea is that that would help you guys. You would immediately see.
Yes,
We don't even have to go through as much
yes.
because
Yeah.
we can see someone's already done this evaluation.
Right.
Thank you very much.
Say hello to
Very
the dog.
interesting discussion.
Okay, so my suggestion is that we put Jay on the back burner and get to the board with an ordinance that has a good possibility of passing.
So I think we're talking about J1, not all of J, because 2 and 3 seem to be fine. Unless Julie, you have,
We're talking about maintenance and repair though, so this all came from another county's maintenance. I was looking for examples of maintenance and repair when the commission had asked us to put something in, and number 2 says such maintenance and repair. There's a, yeah, obviously we could keep the demolition piece because that's not specific to affirmative maintenance, I think.
Well, 2 and 3 are just that
Yeah.
you can go ahead and do repair and maintenance. Don't change the building as a result of it.
But without, it seems that 2 and 3 ought to be also put off till we decide whether we want one, or what form one would be.
Well, you don't need to get a building permit for maintenance and repair
That's
of any
true.
kind of individual items, so.
I bet we could do 2 and 3. I think I'm looking at it more
Yeah.
carefully. We probably could say, just leave that section and just get rid of 1 for now.
Well, except, the prohibitions of this section shall not apply, this is in 3. We need. at
We
least-
could change
at least
the,
some.
well, this section is all of this proposed ordinance. So the prohibition on getting the building permit until you go through the process. I think it's appropriate to keep 2
Yeah,
and 3.
okay, okay,
And we'll just delete 1 and renumber those 2.
yeah. If the rest of the commission, I agree. Sorry, the bonds are not protected.
Small steps.
so we can get rid of L on the finding then for now. That's fine.
Yeah,
I'd like to not lose the idea that there should be some obligation to at least prevent further deterioration of something. that is listed, not eligible to be listed, I mean, in a narrow area.
But then,
There are kind of those two worlds of where there's the
I'm not
economic
saying-
hardship and the
yeah. Okay.
Yes.
adverse, kind of a juxtaposed to, there are potentially some bad players out there. They have a historic resource, they know it's historic, and they allow it to intentionally so that it can be then demolished
Exactly.
later
How
on.
do you deduce
Yeah.
who's doing that?
Well, at the end of the day, then you get you get an evaluation of the property, and a historic architect would come back and say, because of all of the repairs done on the structure, and also because of the lack of maintenance, that it's lost its historical integrity.
So he's asking, how do you know that person?
Right.
Whether the
Was it
owner
purposeful or
is doing it
just-
intentionally.
Right, or, yeah, but there's,
But your first act isn't to go accuse them, it's to find out why they're allowing that.
Well, I'm sorry to say this, but I missed back on H2A. I do have a suggestion. And Annette,
Yes.
can you bring up the H2A?
That's Peter.
Yeah. This was something that wasn't covered in that. Oh, yeah,
They've
I
already
think you've already
passed
got
it.
it.
They're out.
Yeah, she's passed it out. Okay. We have talked as if, oh, well, you just might be adding something on the back of the house, and who's gonna care? But the provisions of this apply to the entire exterior of the house. And I think what I'm suggesting is that at the end of H2A, which is the panel's decision whether the structure change will result in one or more potentially significant aspects, we just add the sentence at the end, which I think is consistent with what our assumption has been all along, but is not stated in the section. Something along these lines. The panel may decide, and this is the review panel, again, may decide that because an exterior alteration will not be within the public view, the alteration will not have a potentially significant effect.
I think they already have that. I think
Where?
It's
it's
in the whole.
in the whole of their review process, looking at all aspects of what constitutes the historic significance of the structure. It may be that, it's a fine example of an architectural type during this period, but it's not so unique as that the entirety of the structure has to be retained as it is. But it could be something where, even though the back part might not be visible from the street, that is part of the context of what makes that building historical.
That's what
I think
I'm
that,
saying.
and that's, but I think that rather, by saying that, it sort of
There's a
prescribes
Impression.
a certain thing that, that's on the back of the building, so it doesn't matter, but it could matter, I guess is what I'm trying to say.
Yeah, well, that's why I say it may. It just seems to me.
But there's all kinds of mays that are in there.
We're talking about, the way I read this ordinance, the entire exterior is included.
Mhm.
And this is just giving them discretion to make.
I don't think we can give them the discretion beyond what is already provided in CEQA. That's the concern. So in determining significance, they're not just looking to this ordinance. They have to look at CEQA's significance criteria. And when I read 15064.5B 1 through 3, I don't see any exceptions in there that say doesn't apply if you can't see it from the road.
But if you read the actual guidelines for conditioning these projects, that is one of the things, but that and a million other
yeah.
things, we would be picking out one item. You don't even have to put authentic windows back in. They can be replaced with modern windows depending on the significance of the particular project that you're looking at.
And that would be done on a case-by-case basis
Yeah.
as those limited scope use permits come forward. We say, in this case, You can add it to the back. It doesn't matter.
Right.
It's not that critical. But in some cases, you may say, no, this is so critical that,
But I just I don't see where that discretion is built in.
It's in the guidelines when you look at the different things and
Well, no,
whether you're
in
gonna
this,
do
in this,
whatever.
in this ordinance. I don't see,
But it's referencing those. It's referencing those documents that tell you how to mitigate and what
Okay.
requirements
developing
there
these,
are, depending on if
this
you're-
under H2C1,
it's that, hey,
page 6, about 2/3 of the way down. In developing these requirements and conditions, the panel shall consider the
Yeah.
guidelines of
okay,
the Secretary of Interior. And that includes a broad range of different things that they can consider that is consistent with CEQA. And I think by pulling out one provision and putting that in the code,
Yeah.
okay.
it complicates
Give
things.
people the impression that all I have to do is
So-
hide it from the street and I'll be fine. And
Okay.
when really they have way more leeway than that actually.
Mhm.
So they might not want to do something thinking, oh, I won't be allowed to do this. It's really the big picture and individuals
so
in the
is-
project.
Consider too broad a term there. Should it be so complied with?
I don't think we should pick out one item from a broad range of possibilities and try to address it in the ordinance, especially those guidelines have been in place for a really long time and they don't seem to change much, but they could change in the future. We should just let those guidelines
Okay, so
control it.
if the planning department, the rest of the planning commission, and legal counsel agree that this is not necessary in order for somebody to say, look, I'm consider this. I'm just planning in addition to my kitchen and to the back of the house, nobody can see it and everything else, but that can be considered.
I think we
Absolutely.
agree it's not necessary.
So,
Yes.
but I think
Well, that didn't answer my question. but-
I would say yes, we could consider it.
Thank you.
Yes.
That's what I need.
Gladish, are you suggesting that by putting that in, that would take them out of the process early on and they wouldn't have to go through the CUP process?
No.
Okay, then in that case, it's unnecessary.
Yeah.
Yep, okay, great. I thank you all for bearing with me. I mean, I think I made some good points.
Some very good points,
You
actually.
always make some points.
That there are other things that aren't necessary, and that's great. Okay,
Okay. I think we need a motion.
then we will, well, we haven't considered resolution.
Oh, yeah,
I do,
let's see that resolution.
It is at the back of the
That's way
packet,
back there.
the very last several pages of your
Yes.
planning commission packet.
okay. Believe it or not, I'm gonna pass out something else.
Oh. It's buried in here.
Let's see. So I have a suggestion before we get to that. And really, I have very few things to suggest on this resolution. Is it the time for me to make these suggestions?
Yeah, I'm trying to find my very original
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
I can share.
document. That's okay, go ahead.
Okay, in the resolution, on the second page, unnumbered, at the top, there's just some words missing. Under evidence, paragraph number 2, it's the adoption of the ordinance is considered. They're just the and is are missing.
I'm sorry, I was reading your handout here. So
Oh, yeah, okay, well, that's second page of the resolution. Near the top, evidence, paragraph 2,
Mhm.
Or it isn't actually, it's an evidence paragraph, it's the second finding. It's just missing the adoption of the ordinance is considered. You're just missing the and is. The adoption of ordinance considered a later activity.
Okay.
Okay? Then the only other change I have comes with the comment under the quote that's number 2. So the quote is substantial changes occur. This is on the same page.
Near the bottom of the page, yeah.
Yeah. So what I'm suggesting is, well, as you can see, eliminating some language and replacing it with other language. It seems to me that what the resolution is saying, and correct me if I'm wrong and clarify it if you would, that since the general plan, the few of any additional structures would become eligible for this program. That's why I'm reading this. And that, since 2019 until now, if you look back 75 years, we would be talking about development, buildings that were built between 1945 and 1949, which was a time, I don't know within this county, but a time of surge of housing development after the war. And so what I'm suggesting is we can reach the same result by saying the same environmental considerations from 2019 apply to the cultural resources that have met the standards of this ordinance since November 2019. Those resources are not significantly different in kind to the resources that would have been covered if the ordinance had existed in 2019. In other words, we're looking at those houses built in 1945 to 1949. They're basically, they're not different from the houses that would have been covered by this ordinance if it had been enacted in 2019. And in the matter of fact, if there were more,
There might be fewer of them.
there might be, well, if there were significant buildings, significant numbers of buildings being built between 1949 and 45 and 49, this ordinance will actually increase the environmental benefits. It would not have any increase in the negative environmental effects the concerns of the section that we're quoting right above it.
Yeah.
I would defer to Julie on this.
With the change.
Okay.
I
I
think
don't
it's
see
actually
any-
a good
Yeah.
point. And it does make it clear that we looked at this specific, we're not just using generic language here, that we looked at this specific issue.
Rest of the commission, okay?
Sure.
He likes it.
Whatever he said. The wordsmiths know better than I am.
Yeah.
And that's,
Hector, how do you feel about that?
No, I'm good.
Okay. So now we might be ready to hear the recommendation unless there's anything anyone else has on the resolution. Nope, okay. Let's hear it.
All right, so staff recommends that the planning commission find that the proposed ordinance is both exempt from SEQA and a later project within the scope of the general plan EIR, and adopt resolution 2024-018, recommending that the board of supervisors adopt the proposed ordinance to repeal section 1716.060 and replace it with a new 1716.060.
resolution
As amended, yes.
and
And with the amendments discussed today on the ordinance itself.
the ordinance itself. And Peter, with almost anybody else I wouldn't trust them to have the amendments right, but I trust you.
Well, hopefully it's not misplaced.
And I really, I think you've done a wonderful job on this, and with all my suggestions, I hope you understand it.
Oh, yeah, no, we're just trying to make it better. I fully, thank you and I appreciate that.
Is there a motion?
I so moved with the changes.
All in favor?
Aye.
Motion passes 4-1-0.
Thank you.
Well, 4-0.
401. Sorry.
Yeah.
Oh, we've lost our whole shorter person category.
Okay.
Come on up.
Donna Carolla, I'm currently the president of the Calaveras County Historical
Oh, wonderful.
Society. And I just really want to thank the whole commission for your perseverance and determination and the wordsmithing and everything that needs to go into creating this. I really applaud your efforts. I think it's a very worthwhile and necessary ordinance. And I really want to thank you.
Thank you.
Good.
Okay. We don't have any informational items. Do we have any commissioner reports?
Well, I have a question. The fourth Thursday in December is not Christmas. Are we having a meeting on the fourth Thursday in December?
I don't think so. I took it off my calendar.
Annette says no, so it's no.
So the next one is the 9th.
Yeah, so in January,
January.
we will see everybody.
And if it applies, remember that you got a envelope on your desk this morning.
Yes, it's time to reapply. So, no, we have an opportunity for a planning director report before we adjourn, but I believe you might have already given it.
No, I gave my staff readout earlier. I have nothing else to contribute. Thank you. Thank you so much for all the input tonight too.
Thank you. So is there any scheduling, anything that we need to talk about before we adjourn?
I just want to, it's okay with Brett, the intent is to bring the Copperopolis Community Plan to the board in January. I'm shooting for the 9th, the first
So it
meeting.
will be to us on January 9th.
That's my hope.
Okay, cool.
So we'll just start off the new year with the whatever.
If we can get that referral as soon as possible, so we can have a good chance to look at it. Great.
I believe that Peter is sticking around until the Copper Community Plan, hardwoods and short-term vacation rental are done. Is that true?
Brett and I will be discussing that. I will be sticking
Most
around.
of that is true.
Yeah. I will be sticking around until we get the Copper Plan adopted, this ordinance adopted, and then I'm just concerned that the amount of time necessary on the short-term vacation rental ordinances may be longer than I intended to stay.
I noticed that Marin County just enacted a short-term vacation rental ordinance that whoever's working on it might.
We will be having a study session with the board, so we can discuss basic direction before we
Good.
work out another draft.
We
'Cause
definitely have opinions.
yes.
So do I.
Okay, then we are adjourned at 11:19.
All right.
Merry Christmas, everybody.
Yes, happy holidays, everyone.
Love this back.
Happy holidays.